All right, everybody, good to see you here for this Thursday session of Nuts and Bolts of New Ventures, this January IAP 2018. You heard from Joe just a taste of the many things that one needs to understand and deal with vis-a-vis legal issues. Last night, we tried to spotlight some of the things relevant to the realm of people and how you identify co-founders and teammates and advisors and more. On the first night, you've got some taste from Bob Jones on the key goal of identifying customers who actually want whatever it is you're thinking of building or providing as a service. Next week, we continue with this theme, but tonight, our goal is to do the end of week one synthesis of the many things that one needs to integrate together in order to start, build, and grow a company. And so the founder journey is in some sense putting the end overall arc in mind, in your minds, as you're imagining the ventures that you're conceiving of right now, that you're in the early days of building. In a few of your cases, you're doing it again. What we hope will emerge from the course of conversation with our four guest entrepreneurs is a better holistic sense of the various things that you can anticipate happening to you, perhaps lessons that they have learned the painful, hard way that you may avoid by virtue of benefiting from their experience. That's the goal. And I've invited to join us four people who represent multiple industry sectors, different degrees of venture development, some fairly early days in their process, some who've been at it repeatedly, and also different ways of engaging with customers, some focusing on industry as clients, others focusing on individual purchasers, people, consumers as clients, so B2B versus B2C. And also the spectrum of technologies, some dealing with some of the most difficult types of technologies available, and some dealing with things that are widely available, but executing well on them is what really matters. So I'd like to just introduce briefly. You see in summary form what their backgrounds, what they've done. Jackie Khoury, alumna from MIT's Sloan program, one of my favorite parts of Sloan, MSMS program, and has been involved in multiple industry sectors, now most recently having co-founded Brio Systems, which is in the health tech arena. She'll tell us much more about that and her progress in building up this business so far in a moment. Chaz Sims, alumnus from electrical engineering, computer science, both undergrad and grad, has been in the IT arena generally for quite a while, now working specifically in the realm of all things logistics, which is a hot topic on several fronts. He's got his own take on that, but that's not how he got started. And so that journey towards where he is now, as you'll see, quite compelling. Owen Johnson, also out of electrical engineering, but let's just say a few years earlier than Chaz. Owen has the unique quality of having been the undergrad who actually got the first ever of what we know today as Lego Mindstorms to work. You understand, programmable Lego bricks didn't come out of nowhere. They came out of a student-driven initiative in the Media Lab. And the Europe who got the first one to work, right there. Now, since then, starting building multiple companies. And also, I should say, not just for-profit ventures. Owen is a case example of somebody who said, look, the things that we benefit from in the greater Boston venture ecology, can we bring those to other parts of the world? In fact, Providence, not very far from here. And I also hope we can touch on that, the world of the nonprofit organization building. Plus, his most recent venture is something rather different from electrical engineering and computer science. It's commercializing the latest flavor of the world's second oldest biotechnology. He's a brewer of beer. Oh, yes. Finally, I'm pleased to have joining us tonight Habib Haddad, who is today actually an investor. He's building up the E14 fund, which is a Media Lab connected and interested in many, many, many industry sectors. I haven't invited him here to talk about the investment world, but instead, what is it like to build up an organization that invests? And also because of his past experience with multiple companies, including here and in the Middle East, so yet another example of region economic development. And perhaps the most sort of scintillating little nugget about Habib is that he's a founding employee of a company that was born right here. It was in these seats that Mak O sat when he was literally in your sort of predecessor seats, if you will. A doctoral student in what's now CSAIL Lab for Computer Science, Artificial Intelligence. He had a technology and he was thinking, are there commercial prospects? And when Yonald, our speaker a week from tonight, when Yonald spoke about his own experience building up Mimeo, those two resonated and ended up co-founding the next business, Mach 3, today known as Everyscape. Habib was there at the very beginning, helping get this going. And he'll tell us not only about that early days startup, but the things that happened subsequently. So we've got in front of you a group of people who've had a variety of experiences, and I want to get them going now by asking them to each do what Bob Jones has been challenging you to do. Summarize in a minute or so, elevator pitch-esque fashion, what it is that you're doing now with your most recent venture or organization. Jackie, why don't you kick us off?
Hi, this is my first panel ever, so I hope I do this right. So 45% of adult Americans in the US have one chronic lifestyle disease. We co-founded Brio Systems, which is basically a direct-to-consumer preventative care service at fitness centers today. We have monthly check-ins that basically involve a very painless blood draw from your biceps. We ship your sample to a CLIA lab, and we send you a health report that contains information on where you are today. More importantly, month on month, we show you trends on where you are headed. So we are a support system that carries you throughout the year from one annual physical to the other, to the next one. We launched 2 days ago. We had people queuing up, paying us $75 for our service. Yeah, that was like the most amazing thing ever. We have a big project with the Boston Fire Department, and we raised some money. Yeah.
All right, we'll get into more of those details, but thank you, Jackie, for giving us a taste of things. And by the way, paying customers. If you remember nothing else from Bob Jones, remember that. All right, thank you, Jackie. Chaz.
Yeah, so I work with Wise Systems, the CEO and co-founder of that. And basically what we do is we help companies that deliver goods and services do that more efficiently. We have a software platform to do that. So take a company like Coca-Cola that has to do 10,000 deliveries across the city of Boston. How do you do that? Like, how many drivers do you need to do that? What do their schedules look like? What's the order of those schedules? How do you satisfy customer time windows when they want those deliveries to happen? So we provide software that both helps them plan for that, but actually adjust to the changing circumstances throughout the day. So what happens when there's traffic or weather, or a customer doesn't show up, or a loading dock is full. So we help them adjust to all of those different things that happen throughout the day, learn from that data, and use it for better planning in the future. And so we're pretty excited. We have about 20 people right now. We've raised venture capital. We do have paying customers as well that we can talk more about later, but that's what we do.
Excellent, thank you, Chaz. Owen?
So Revival Brewing Company appears to be a beer company, and that's what we are today. But in the long term, what we're looking to do is build a network of what I call retail manufacturing destinations, what you may think of in an urban area as a brew pub, but a brew pub that is authentically local, that is producing product using the most local ingredients possible, and really is a hub for the local food and beverage community to help stimulate that community and provide people and tourists, people living in the area and tourists, access to that community.
Very nice. Habib?
So today I'm a venture investor. I run a fund that invests in media spin-offs, and the way I look at myself as a VC is basically, you know, when the Formula One cars are going around and they have pit stops where you have to stop and change the wheels and get the gas, that's me, basically. Usually the VCs is someone who's taking a back seat, helping, identifying the winners, helping invest in them. And frankly speaking, a lot of also the early stage venture work is therapy work, just being there supportive for the entrepreneurs and the ups and downs, and we can talk more about that in a bit as well. And
Great.
I'm a proud investor in Wise.
Oh, ho, ho. Very good. Relationship building. Yeah. Now, give us all just a taste of the scale of things by the metrics you think matters. I mean, number of people, each of you are at different phases of development. How many, crates have you sold, Owen, for example? And Jackie, you're in the middle of just getting going, really. What are your metrics that matter?
We look at the number of subscribers per month. We have 20 subscribed people that basically do one blood test every month. So we're looking at churn as well. Metrics that matter.
And in the organization, I mean, your early days?
Early days, there's only 2 of us. He's laughing, he knows how much work that is. So our services is very ops heavy. So making sure that you match, the barcode to the sample, to the person's name, and not screwing that up is like a big deal. And so we also have metrics to make sure that we don't screw up like our processes.
And you think then
that's
over
mainly
time the key
focus.
metrics will be? I mean, for example, this number of subscribers, this ability to continue to charge $75, the margin. What are you thinking as your?
So we do think of the margins. We do think of pricing. Pricing is a big question for us right now as well, because aside being ops heavy, our service is expensive, and there's a trade-off. So for example, we try to optimize the number of people we test per hour, so that we charge so we optimize the use of our phlebotomist and so on. And so there's all these things up in the air and trying to
Aha, so it's
piece
a
them
work
together.
in progress. In other
It's a
words.
work in progress.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chaz, how about you? You say you're up to 20 people at this
Yep.
point. How many clients are you engaging with? What's the metric that a B2B logistics IT company cares about?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things for us is the number of drivers on our platform, and then also the number of locations that those drivers are, or depots for each of those drivers. So we have about 1,500 users, drivers on our system across 30 locations across the United States and Canada right now. So those are the big numbers that we're looking at. We have that across about 5 to 10 customers.
Okay.
So our top line metric, other than revenue, is barrels of beer per year or case equivalents. So a barrel of beer is 13.8 cases, although we have 16-ounce cases, so they're actually 10.3 cases. So we do about 4,000 barrels a year in 2017. That was between distribution, which is the bulk of that, and in-house sales, which is secondary. The interesting thing about that is that at distribution, the next kind of metric I would look at is how much do we sell a case of beer for, or a barrel of beer for. So a barrel of beer averages around $325 at distribution when we sell it, and it's usually packaged up, et cetera, in different ways, either half barrels, 6 barrels, or cases. But if we sell it on site, the revenue is about double that. Now, even more interesting is the gross margin of the revenue sold on site. All of that extra revenue is gross margin. So the gross profit sold on site is much, much higher, anywhere from 6 to 10 times per case. And so that's one of the reasons you're seeing breweries pop up that are now selling. And the other is that the laws have changed. I would love to use your software, but I can't actually deliver to retailers or individuals.
Yeah.
So the other metric I look at, which is more of a long-term metric, is just where we're being distributed. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head in terms of the retail locations, but we're in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Tokyo currently. And the bulk of our business is still in our home state in Rhode Island. Massachusetts is catching up pretty quickly to that. And finally, it's we have an enviable problem that is still a problem in that we can't make enough beer. So if I were in the software industry, that would be awesome, because I'd just push a button and Amazon Web Services would come to my rescue. But there is no such thing in the manufacturing world. And in the beer world, it's strange because there's a lot of hubris, so every brewer has their own brewery, and only about 1% to 3% of the capacity in the industry right now is contract brewing, which we do because we can't make enough beer at our own facility, but we still are negotiating new contracting relationships even today to try and scale them up, and it takes 3 to 6 months to do that. So it's an interesting challenge.
And how many of you are we at this point?
So the brewing industry, the craft beer industry, has about 6,000 breweries.
Oh,
if you
no.
count everything, you mean?
Well, that's interesting. I meant you as a
Yeah,
company.
we are about 10 full-time people and then 10 hourly, which some of whom are full-time. So I would say about 15 FTEs.
Okay.
And we'll hit 1.4 million in revenue in 2017.
Okay, the latest venture. Habib, you're a different sector, of course, but it's a venture in its own right to start.
Yeah,
and
maybe
build
I'll answer it slightly differently. Is the entrepreneurs that we look at. So I think usually the best entrepreneurs that you have a trait of being able to see the micro and the macro at the same time and balance that. And one of the questions I like to ask entrepreneurs is, give me one of the best insights you've had the past year, and then I follow that, give me the best insights you've had the last week. And usually you want someone that is able to think about trends and imagining the future. And the past week is more about executions and all of that. And I think then when you have that vision, then you have that ability, then it's more about how you get there, right? And a lot of times entrepreneurs and founders, early stage founders, usually follow metrics that don't make sense. And sometimes it's vanity metrics, just enough to look good and be good on a PowerPoint deck and go and talk to investors. Sometimes just testing. And what happens is you really want to find that metric, that metric you can actually like a lever. Imagine a dashboard that you can play with. In the case, for example, of Chaz, he said the number of drivers. Probably it's a number of drivers that are actually active drivers that love the platform are even more important. So if you identified that, you didn't say number of trucks or number of clients, because that's a lever that he can play with and eventually grow his business. Ultimately speaking, the final answer is going to be, your top line, your bottom line, your profit margins, et cetera, et cetera. But what gets you there, your key unit economics are really important. At the beginning, people do things that don't scale at all. And in your case, I don't know why you're in Tokyo, but it seems you had an opportunity, you're opportunistic about that. So people do that don't scale, which is amazing. And eventually, after 30, 40, 50 employees and up, you start thinking about structuring things and just putting a bit more science and math behind it.
Excellent meta answer to the question, but I do want to know, from a venture investor's point of view, what do you actually track and care about?
So as an early stage venture investor, it's how many companies we put our own metrics, which are how many companies that we're seeing, how many companies we're ending up investing in, and eventually it's how many companies are exiting and how much money we're returning back to investors. That ultimately, as a fund, you need to do that because then you're going to raise another fund and another fund, and ultimately you're going to go and show your returns. But as a fund, because we're uniquely positioned in the sense of we're the Media Lab fund, we usually look at ourselves as two hats. One hat, which is the non-profit hat of community building and building this ecosystem around the Media Lab, and the other hat, which is investing. So balancing the two is always something that we have to play with as well.
Excellent. And prefigure is another important question I want to revisit later in our discussion. But before we do the sort of focus on entrepreneurial ecology building and social venturing, I'd like to ask each of you to just give us the brief background of how you got to where you are now. What took you from your time in school or in your first job to the current venture state? And of course, this is a shorter and longer version of the story, given how much you've done. Jackie, give us a taste of what brought you to Brio today.
When I came to Sloan, I had no idea I was going to get into this. So I was always interested in healthcare, background in hospitals and retail. After Sloan, I was working at the MIT Link Lab, helping commercialize a screening tool for suspicious lesions. And so I got really obsessed with data and its role in preventative care. But I also needed a full-time job, so I started doing business development for a drone tech venture. And I increasingly realized that even though I enjoyed my role at the tech venture, where I really wanted to be full-time was in healthcare. Lucky me, I was working with someone who was also thinking about making a transition into the healthcare space, and we were having conversations about preventative care, data, how do we, design this amazing direct-to-consumer company, and we just, I guess, decided to go for it full time. So.
And so from the commitment between you two to get going and today, how long has that been, and what just give us a sense of what it is you've had to do to get to your current thinking?
I was 1 month away from my visa deadline in America as a foreigner, so that was pretty stressful. So March 2017, we incorporated, even though we had just a vague idea of what we were going to do, we incorporated the company and committed just so I could like file an extension to my OPT. And we found a small office space at WeWork, and we just like hammered at the problem until we got to where we are today. So.
I'm going to follow up on this, because this hammering at the problem is really the customer engagement that you heard so much about from Bob Jones on the first night, 2 nights ago. And what Jackie and Boris and the team have done is remarkable. We'll touch on that in a minute. Jaz, what's your pathway in brief?
Yeah, so I came to MIT studying computer science. Along the way, I worked at a few startups, and there was one summer I did an internship at Goldman Sachs. I was there for about 2 days, and I was like, this isn't what I want to do long term. So, the following summer, I got to do an internship in Silicon Valley, and I was like, okay, this makes more sense. And so, the fall of my senior year, I actually took a class called Development Ventures over in the MIT Media Lab. That's where our team actually got started, and we actually came together around a different idea. We were actually looking at how do you better crowdsource information in post-conflict zones. So we had this passion for data, and we were like, can we use this information even in a place like Iraq, where one of our founders is from, can we use it to actually better provide information and things like that? And so we were like, let's go for it, let's do this. We actually picked up another one of our founding team members who was just a friend from an introduction. He was like, yeah, I want to join. We're like, great. It was the easiest interview process ever. And we actually built a product around this, and we went and tested this product at a music festival in Denmark, surprisingly enough. While we were there, we found out that the use case of actually just getting people to give you information and give you data is pretty difficult, and trying to build a daily use case around that. So that led us to a place where we were like, how else can we start to collect data and information? And while doing this, I was studying my master's and working on that over at the MIT Media Lab in the Human Dynamics group at Sandy. And so we started calling transportation companies. And we just started calling them over and over again, asking them for data. It's like, hey, can you give us data? And then eventually we learned 2 things. So one was that if you ask someone for data, they're going to say sure, but what are you going to do for me? So there has to be some value exchange there. And the other thing that we learned by talking to all these companies was that logistics and transportation wasn't a solved problem. And although goods get delivered all the time, you have FedEx, you have UPS, you have Coca-Cola, Walmart, all these companies, you're like, isn't this solved yet? It's it just isn't. And so that led us to really starting WISE. And so that summer we were part of Delta V, formerly known as GFSA. We talked to an advisor over who used to direct research at the MIT Center for Transportation Logistics, and he validated this. And we're like, is this true? He's like, yeah, not solved. You can definitely have a lot of improvements there. And that was that's really what rallied us together. And so our founding team is still together. There's 4 of us, which is super unlikely, I hear. That was about 4 years ago, 5 years ago that we first met. We're still together, still working together. One of our largest customers is Anheuser-Busch, so I understand your problems. And we've been going ever since.
All right, fantastic.
Yeah.
I just want to vouch for the fact that it is a big problem. We deliver to 7 different distributors, and it's still a problem, and it's only going to get geometrically worse for us. So I'm glad we met tonight.
Yeah.
I'm sure in about a year I'll be talking to you.
We should chat.
So I think I'm older than most of the people on this panel, but I'm not sure. So I was class of '96, course 6, mostly computer science. Joost alluded to my time at the Media Lab, which was over an IAP that we built the first programmable Lego brick that was designed by a PhD student named Randy Sargent. That was a lot of fun. But it wasn't until the summer between my junior and senior year that I really got the entrepreneurial bug. And I did an internship at one of the first internet startups called NetGenesis. founded by a handful of people, Matt Gray, Raj Bhargava, and Matt Cutler, were three of them, and there's one other person I'm missing. Anyhow, those guys have been hugely successful. They got me hooked. And so I took 7 courses my fall term, my senior year, graduated a semester early, and started a company with 6 people, which was a big mistake we can talk about later, called Interdimensions. We were essentially mercenaries, coders for hire. Java had been released in beta right before Christmas. In January, we were selling ourselves as Java experts because technically we were. As undergrads, landed a $50,000 consulting project, which at the time seemed like more money than God ever had. We were eating a lot of ramen noodles and just kind of ran with we were actually building products, software products, et cetera, but eventually just ended up being a shop similar to Vine or Scient or Razorfish, but much smaller. So we started with technology consulting, went into user experience and design, and then went into business strategy. Built that to about 60 people before the entire industry collapsed in 2001. It was going to collapse anyway, but 9/11 accelerated that. So to give an example of a macro shift, coders right out of school were getting charged out at about $2,000 a day. That dropped to about 0. So overnight after 9/11, we saw every single one of our customers put a hold on every project and every new project, and that ranged from startup companies of 3 people all the way to AOL Time Warner. No one knew what to do. It was a terrible time for the industry. Thankfully, we had just raised $2 million, so we survived that, but ended up having to scale the company back by about 50% a month after 9/11. So a year after that, I decided the company really needed to shift into product versus consulting services, but with 6 founders, it was very difficult to make that shift. So I left, took a year off, did a bunch of real estate stuff, and also worked on some kind of community building, nonprofit stuff in Providence at the time. And then started a new company, which was built a bunch of different software for small owners of small residential real estate. It was a management tool called Rentomatic, and we had a website called Rentometer, which was crowdsourced data to begin with around rental rates. So we were one of the first sites to take off for people that we helped landlords and tenants determine if they were paying or charging the right amount for rent. And that was the first time that someone had really taken off doing that with crowdsourced data, and that's another, we'll cut that short for now. But after that company, actually started a venture company similar to Techstars. So it was an accelerator down in Providence called Beta Spring. We ended up raising 2 funds in 5 years, deployed that capital in about 90 companies. So we did cohort-based 12-week models, had anywhere from 10 to 15 companies from all over the world. We would interview around 300 per cohort, and they would come to Providence for 12 weeks. We kind of helped them figure out, really it was like a therapist's job of team. What we did was de-risk the team. So we came in super earlier than most of the other accelerators out there, de-risk the team, and then many of our companies would go on to other accelerators. And that's still going, but in 2014 we wrapped up our 2nd fund, and I had coincidentally and randomly fallen into starting Revival on the side as a project with a professional brewmaster out of Trinity Brew House in Providence who was regionally and nationally known. I was a home brewer. I knew stuff about startups. He knew stuff about beer. We started on the side, and 5 years later, kind of everything converged, and I said, okay, I'm going to shift from venture back into entrepreneurship. Beta Spring still exists, but it's based on revenue royalty financing. And we can talk about that later too, and why that shift happened. But yeah, so now today I am running Revival. We've been going really full time for 2 years. Have seen kind of going from $200,000 in revenue in 2014 to 1.4 this year, and significant penetration growth, and of course refinement of our strategy and building up of our core capability, et cetera. So it's been quite a ride, and a very, very different industry on many different levels from software.
So yeah, I have a kind of a quirky road into the venture world, completely unexpectedly. So I'm actually originally from Lebanon, and I moved to USC, to California, to do my my master's in computer vision, and my dream was to work in Hollywood and computer and graphics. And so I graduated in 2001, right after 9/11, and little did I know that finding a job with a name like Habib in Hollywood was almost impossible. Luckily, at that time, my ex-girlfriend was at MIT. She was in course 6, and we had broken up, but I still had her username and password to all the stuff, so I used that. And I went in, and that's how I found Mok and Yonald. And they were just starting right after your course, Nuts and Bolts here. And I flew in, and we're like, okay, let's do it. And so I joined them as employee number 1. We raised a bunch of capital, and we grew the company very quickly, but we did everything wrong in the book, everything you can imagine. And one day I go to the office, and they had, everyone had been fired, including the CEO, except for just the technical co-founder. I was like, okay, we have to let you go. And I was like, shit, I'm actually on a H-1B. So I did what any entrepreneur could do at that time. I took the weekend off and I went to Vegas. So I went to Vegas, and I remember that, I kid you not, I'm walking back to the airport, and the slot machines are ringing in behind me, and they call me back, and Mok calls me back. I was like, hey, we're assembling a small team, you should come back. So I said, okay, fine. I go back. I stay there for a couple of months, but then I leave. I will go work on the early days of the GPU at ATI. I needed to figure out a way to get a green card. And as I was doing that work with the early days of GPU, I was still itching to do something. And I got the idea of starting a company that's working on specializing in AI linguistics, mostly for right-to-left languages. So enabling people that don't have keyboards to type phonetically languages that they don't have access to. So eventually, I went back, and one of my early co-founders in Mach 3 I met was one of the smartest people I've ever met. I remember I saw him once at the gym, and I hunted him down for a month, going to the elliptical next to him, and I hate the elliptical, trying to convince him to join me. Eventually, he agreed to join me. And then we started a company, and then that company was called Yemli, and very quickly we grew. We became kind of the Google, basically, of the Middle East, and went through lots of ups and downs there. Eventually sold that company to Yahoo in 2011. But also what happened in 2011 was a different excitement of mine as an entrepreneur coming from the Middle East. And I know now finally my American friends realize that you always have to be an activist. You always have to be a social entrepreneur, especially when you have crazy politicians. And we have plenty of those. And so now welcome to my world. So being someone from there, and then at 2011, Arab Spring happened. And completely coincidentally, I find myself in the middle of the Arab Spring. My friend in Egypt got jailed, and I was helping him to start the Facebook group. In Tunisia, my friend got jailed, and eventually we found him on Foursquare, where he signed in before we knew he was in the Ministry of Interior. In Syria, we have another friend. Unfortunately, we learned not too long ago that he was executed. But I got very much engaged in that space. We built even a technical tool that allows people to circumvent the internet when the internet was shut down in Egypt, called Speak to Tweet. And then eventually did that, but I got so disappointed with the outcome. And this is where I decided I want to do something with that. So I moved to the Middle East to build a community of entrepreneurs. And the idea was use that energy of people who were doing technical stuff, in that case social media, but to do something good. So built a media platform, kind of the TechCrunch of the Middle East, and built the tech startup of the Middle East, and we had a small fund. Eventually we had the largest fund. But I still kept my connections back to Boston. And when the new director of the Media Lab, Joe Ito, joined the Media Lab, he was an old friend of mine. I helped him start design some of the programs around the Media Lab with the E14 fund initially. And then eventually, you were part of the first cohort, Chaz. And then eventually, when we realized that there was something more interesting, said, let's build something of a fund. With the learnings of building communities and with the learnings of building that emotional mesh. So moved back earlier last year to do that. And so basically, I like to say that I'm maybe the only one on this panel who has not gone to MIT. So I'm proud to say I hacked MIT.
Very excellent.
Well done.
That's good thinking. Well, you've got now a taste of their various pathways to the present. What I'd like to shift to next is to reinforce what Bob talked about on day one, customer. How did each of you, or are you in the thick of, identifying what people actually want and are willing, at least in the end or ultimately, to pay good money for? Jackie, you're really in the thick of this. So what are you doing to figure out what you're doing as a venture, engaging with people?
So when we first started, we looked at preventative care on like all different fronts. So we were pricking ourselves in our office, drawing our own blood, going to our PCP, asking them to draw the same tests. They were very suspicious with that. So we tried every single like health product there is out there in the market. While doing that, we both discovered that we were pre-diabetic, on the cusp of. And that was like a big wake-up call. We both thought of ourselves as young and healthy, and when did this happen? How did this happen? Why did my PCP not run those tests earlier? And more importantly, why is my PCP dismissive of my results, telling me like, you are not sick yet? So we were doing that, and at the same time, we were thinking, okay, so where would we find consumers that would care like us? Now, the interesting thing is that people do not want to be told that they're sick. So even if fear works, when you go and talk to people and say like, hey, we're doing this thing, we're screening, we think you should follow those metrics, they're like, I don't care. So we were like, okay, let's go to boutique gyms where people invest money, care about health, and try to figure out what do those people really want. And so I subscribed to ClassPass in 3 gyms and started working out like twice a day sometimes, and meeting RDs and changing my diet every other day to figure out like what works and what would those people really want to do. We were like offering demos to coaches, drawing their blood, putting like health reports in front of them, being like, is this what you want to see? And so fast forward today, when we launched 10 days ago, just looking at the observations, we were able to support some of the parts of the hypotheses that we had. So for example, our clients do come from boutique gyms. Around 80% are women ages 35 to 48. They're really doing this because they care about health, not weight, not skin, not any of those other things that initially you would think they would care about. They have families, they have kids, they have no time. And so the observations that so we had all these hypotheses, we had like different customer segments that we explored. We also have the corporate wellness space that we're getting some traction from, but kind of like not really sure what they want. But when we were there on the ground looking at like who wants this, who is paying me $75, that was like a, completely different kind of insight. And we're interviewing them before, during, after, sending surveys, and I would say like always in the process of iterating on
And there's a difference between asking them whether they'd like something and whether they'd actually put money on the table for something.
Yeah.
All right, well, you're in the thick of it, and it sounds like this process of relentless iteration is the essence.
Yes.
Chaz, you already described that you pivoted from the initial concept to the new. Where did that emerge from? And it's one thing to make that shift. Logistics is a colossal sector. How do you focus?
So how do we make the shift, and then
that transition.
Yeah, so I think the transition was really, we just like sat in a room and kind of looked at the trial or pilot that we did, and really looked at the responses, and then we started talking to our network to get feedback. There were some other resources that we took advantage of. We were a part of the iLab, Harvard iLab. I hate to say it, but we were. So,
took advantage of both MIT, Delta V, and Harvard iLab.
Yeah,
That's perfect. Getting the two universities to do tuition rebate, get some money back.
Yes. So so we were over there and just like really started thinking about this problem of like how do we get more data, and how do we really like build a system that can survive on its own and is added to by people interacting with it, not necessarily needing people in order to get started. And so that's really like the mindset that we started taking, and that's when that shift happened for us. And like, again, transportation just seemed like a really good spot for that. There's so much data. You have trucks moving around all the time. And it's like, what is being done with this information?
And landing that first paying customer.
Yeah, it was a challenge. Like enterprise sales was something that was like foreign to all of us really. And I think also the pace that businesses move was something else that was really foreign. Like at MIT, everything is like, okay, you have a problem, let's go solve it tomorrow. Or I have a piece that it's due next week. And so everything was moving at this very quick pace. There's a lot of predictability in how things happen, but you could have a good conversation with an enterprise customer, and it's like, all right, see you in a month. And it's like, what just happened? And
Long sales cycles.
long sales cycles, and really learning how to navigate an organization, get a bunch of buyers to come around a decision. I mean, right now we have to talk to VP of supply chain, IT, drivers, their managers. Sometimes it can go up to the COO to like sign off on the deal. And so trying to figure out how to navigate that and coming from a context of being students was definitely a challenge. And I think part of it was, we found the right people who like saw something special in us and like kept driving us forward. We did some POCs and pilots and things like that, and they saw just enough value to keep us going through to the next gate.
And Owen, you and Abhi, various ventures so synthesize in engaging and figuring out what customers actually want. What were the most sort of differentiatingly useful things you did? I mean, brew beer, yes.
Yeah, I mean the beer, right? This unique insight that people like to drink beer. So that was pretty surprising. But I would say the most interesting insight we had was actually around Rentometer. So what was happening? Well, the insight was nobody knew, really, no small landlord or no tenant really knew if they were, or very few, really knew if they were charging the right amount for rent or spending the right amount for rent. And no one knew how to get that data, right? You could go to, at the time, you could go to Craigslist and you could kind of, as a landlord or tenant, look and see what people were offering, but you couldn't see into their apartments and you couldn't see what level of quality was. And so we basically, what we were trying to do was we wanted to get landlords onto our management platform because that's what we charged for. And we were like, well, landlords don't talk to each other, but tenants talk to each other. So we need to get the attention of tenants, and that will get the attention of landlords. And so we did something really simple. We said, okay, we're going to iterate over a number of small experiments. So it can't take us more than a month to build it because we can't afford to take a year to figure this out. And we're going to just be smart about it. So we got lucky. We hit the first time. But the insight was, so people wanted that information. No one could find it, especially not tenants. And the quality information actually didn't matter. So we kind of set up something tricky where we didn't have any data at all. So we set up a website, rentometer.com, tell us the number of bedrooms you have, number of bedrooms, how much you pay for rent, and the address. And I think that was all we asked for. And we would have people input that data, and then if we didn't have data for that region, we would say, oh, we're sorry, we don't have enough data for your region. Come back in a couple of weeks. And what ended up happening that we didn't anticipate was that in area, we didn't need a lot of data to return something meaningful. So something meaningful was, you are either paying too much for rent or you have a really nice apartment, right? So we didn't know if they had a really nice apartment. We didn't know if they were paying too much for rent, but one of those two things was true if they were higher than the average. Or you've got a great deal, or you have an apartment that's probably not so nice. And both, and then they could figure out which one that was because they kind of knew if their apartment was nice or not, and they would know if they were being overcharged. And landlords know exactly that piece of information. So the other interesting thing about that was that, so this was an emotional sell, so to speak, to get the value we were giving them was we promised them this value. For the first couple of weeks, we couldn't provide anybody that value, but we only needed 3 or 4 data points to actually start providing value. And if you're in New York City, that happens in like a millisecond on the internet, right? 4 people show up in a specific block group in like that. So in high density areas where most of our traffic was coming from, within a couple hours, we had all the data we needed. And if you're in the middle of rural Virginia, there's no data anyway. So no one's expecting you to do it, right? So one person shows up and that's the only person looking, so it doesn't really matter. And so what ended up happening that was actually key was we were working with VMS, and one of our mentors at VMS, Venture Mentoring Service at the time, which this wasn't my first venture, but it was one of my co-founders' first ventures, which is why we decided to do VMS. And one of our mentors, whose name is escaping at the moment, introduced us to a writer at lifehacker.com. And they covered us, and within an hour of their post, that day we had 150,000 visitors, and then, just kind of took off from there. So, that's the serendipity of being covered in the right place. But the insight that we were testing, and which ended up being true, was this: don't ask people for a lot of data, ask them for the bare minimum, and give them a promise of something of value, and they will tell you, all right? And if it's not so sensitive, which your address, the number of bedrooms, and how much you pay for rent really isn't anything. We didn't ask for email address or anything like that. So that was probably the most interesting piece.
So I think in 2008 was the first Techstars in Boulder, Colorado, or around that time. And I went to it, and I remember we took some time off with a friend of mine who was also running a startup at the time, and we drove in the mountains. And at some point, there's the road stops and there's dirt road. And as you're driving, there was a sign that says, here are the things you need to do if you face a mountain lion. And it was, you have to stand up, put a jacket above your head, and then pretend you're much bigger than what you are, and then you scare the mountain lion. I remember at that time I was going through ups and downs in my startup, and I look at that like, shit, this is it. This is basically how you build a startup, is to pretend you're bigger than what you are. And you use everything you have at your disposal. You use the press, you use your VMS, you use the Media Lab member network, whatever it is, to work all the network up and down, left and right, whatever it is with your first few clients. And then eventually you figure out how to systemize that. But I'll tell you also a war story that happened, well, not a war story, it's like a story that happened in my 2 startups ago in my company, Yemli, where we're working on the right-to-left languages. So we built the search engine that became kind of the Google of the Middle East. And then when we were building it, we were being covered by the press. All of that was working very well. But I was building it from here, and I had never done any business in the Middle East. And I had assumed that our clients, the way we would make money, the real metric would be the number of users on the website using it, like Google would be like people searching, people typing. And then it turns out that that market was very bad, was still lagging in terms of online money spent, online advertising. And so we had built this, and we raised, but at some point we were just running out of money, and at some point we went completely bankrupt. I mean, even personally bankrupt. I had to go scramble to find some foreign exchanges to go exchange those, because we were like, let's go. I had employees, and we were not paying ourselves. And it was really, really scary. And in 1 week, I remember I spent literally just on LinkedIn. At that time, LinkedIn was actually people who would reply to LinkedIn at that time. So and sending emails. Eventually, that I discovered a completely unknown market to me, which was, especially in Boston, was very, very interesting and surprising. There's a big linguistics industry here. You have companies like BBN or Raytheon or Nuance or Basis Tech. And one of them actually really decided to buy and become our clients that week. They paid us $500,000 and then completely uncovered for us a market that we had never even thought about. So it's not really, I wouldn't advise that to get, but in this case it was like, but what not to do in retrospect was we made too many assumptions. We built a product for a different market, away from it, and we took too many risks, and we thought that the real metric in this case was consumers using the website. It turns out that that metric really didn't translate at all to money, and therefore we had to think about something else.
Mm-hmm. Well, so you all now, I think, have a sense of the various ventures that our panelists have engaged in and what got them going in connecting to the people who care. Let's shift a bit to some of the more difficult or challenging or even exotic questions. Both Habib and Jackie have touched on the domain of visa challenges for themselves or their employees. Owen, you hinted at the disagreements that prevented change in interdimensions. By contrast, Chaz, you had almost the amazing experience of having 4 founders who went through this pretty stark or dramatic transition. And in no particular order at this point, can we talk about founder disagreements? Not to reveal confidential details, but rather to say, look, what do you wish you had done vis-a-vis agreeing on how to disagree, or what are some of the more painful things that you wish you could have avoided? Any of you?
I'll start. Yeah. I'll start with the oldest first. since that'll be the least incriminating for anyone involved. So at InterDimensions, which was started out of a room at Kappa Sig here, it was
Fraternity brothers.
Fraternity brothers. I think there's 4 of us to start with, all the same class. We quickly added an alum, and then we added a random guy from Fidelity. It turned out the guy did pretty well at the end of the day, but he was a VP at Fidelity. He was older than we were, right? We thought, oh, this guy's going to come on and kind of show us how to do this. He had no idea about how to run a startup or what the internet was about. I remember we played a little trick on him where, the internet was new. No one knew what HTML was. No one knew what the web was, and we showed him a page, and then somebody in the other room was changing it, and we reloaded. He said, "Oh my God, that's magic!" Right? So this is the level of of sophistication this person had around technology. So that was one mistake, because what ended up happening was this person also had a giant ego, and when we basically said, "Look, you didn't join the company. You're still at your job at Fidelity. You need to leave," he was like, "You have to pay me $20,000 to leave." So we were stupid, and we didn't just dissolve the company. What we did was we paid him it was probably a good decision. We paid him $20,000, which was all the money we had, to leave. And that was our first mistake, was kind of just assuming that somebody that was older than us had experience that was relevant to our startup. That also ended up with, well, I skipped some details. There was one of my fraternity brothers who had brought him in, ended up leaving right before that. And that was because, and I'm still friends with this person to this day. It took about 10 years to kind of get over the experience, but and rebuild a friendship. But basically, he was passive aggressive. So he was unhappy, felt like he was doing a lot of the work, et cetera, et cetera. He didn't like what he was doing. He was getting stressed out and tired. He was a roommate of ours. And at the end of the day, he didn't really express himself until he blew up. And then we had to kind of reassemble after that blow up and kind of help him transition out. And then the older guy, the real story was, he said he would leave as long as this other guy was happy. The guy was happy, he left, and the guy asked us for 20 grand. So you can't, he basically wasn't even good to his word. So that was an artifact of 2 different things. 6 people. I would never recommend starting a company with more than 3. And I would recommend starting with at least one other person, for other reasons. So 2 and 3 are the optimal company startup size. And then the other piece was just really, at the time, we had no clue. We were 21. We had no idea how to manage interpersonal relationships. And we didn't have a lot of mentors in this case, because there wasn't a startup ecosystem like there is now. So it's awesome in many ways. But then that mistake about assuming that an older, more experienced person was going to come in and just help us make our business a success, which we repeated, by the way, because we were young, but in a much longer time frame. So the end of that company, and I was kind of generous in saying that the founders couldn't agree. 5 of the 6 founders agreed, and the CEO that we had brought in, who was an MIT alum afterwards, said he agreed. He was running our New York office. We were running our Boston office and all the technology. We were developing a product for the legal industry because they were the only ones buying systems. They were counter-cyclical. They were doing intranets at the time. And then I find out 8 months later that nothing had changed in New York, that I was getting a bunch of lip service, and that all of the salespeople in New York weren't really focused on the industry. And at that point, I just said, okay, I'm done with that, right? That trust was broken. But again, I put my faith in an older CEO who taught me many things and was very good in other ways, but was very bad in others, and I was blinded by that, and I really wasn't paying attention. And there are plenty, I don't mean to say this because I'm older than he is now, right? Older than both of those people were. There are plenty of great people out there that are older that have awesome experience that you should listen to. But just don't blindly follow them. That's the advice. Yeah.
Others, whether it's founder disagreements or legal challenges, anything that stands out that you wish you had known a way of identifying it or resolving it before it happened to you?
Oh, a corollary. Definitely understand the legal stuff. Don't outsource that to the older person who's the CEO. Because that was part of the problem of the first CEO who set the company up wrong. and controlled everything, even though that wasn't actually the agreement. But his lawyers did it all. So no matter if you're the technical co-founder, the marketing co-founder, anything, if you're a co-founder, develop a relationship with that lawyer, that's your corporate lawyer, in the beginning, and read all the documents and make sure you understand them and make sure they align with whatever you're talking about as your group. That'll solve a lot of problems.
Or avoid them. Yeah.
I can give this a shot. So this is my first time as someone's co-founder. I can give some background story. So I mentioned the visa very lightly, but when we were starting the company, so many things were happening in our own personal lives. So my co-founder was actually breaking up with his own co-founder, and that is a huge...
At a previous company.
In the previous company. And that is a huge emotional thing to take on. And I believe we took it very lightly, the two of us. I was also leaving that company. I guess I didn't even expect that I would be leaving, that the visa would be a problem. I was calling up immigration lawyers. I had no idea what was going to happen. And to give you a picture of a bit of my background, today is the anniversary of the Egyptian Revolution. So I didn't leave my country for education primarily. I left my country because I have no good memory growing up there. I love my people, but it's a very tough place to grow up in, especially given who you are and being a woman and other things like that. So the visa problem was just so big in my head because I was like, after all this, like a massive loan, no money, like my family's not around. I haven't seen them for like 3.5 years. And I'm just gonna go back. So there's that in my mind. There's my co-founder going through a breakup. And when they tell you that co-founding a company with someone is like a marriage, it is. So it's not just about your personal problems, it's theirs. You see the person every day, and you're both bringing your baggage into this office. And then you're jump-starting a company, so there's that too. And so I wish I realized that we never stopped, we never gave ourselves a break. And my way of dealing with things is to like just power through them versus my co-founder would take a step back and just not communicate, and so that would create lots of tension. Today we both learned to like never close the door. Never close the door, meaning like no matter what happens, you show up to that office and you talk about it, and it's not gonna be pretty. That's the first thing, don't close the door, and just keep showing up. Like on the worst days ever, the one thing I learned is to just show up to that meeting, show up to that just like work day, and just deal with it. So that's about us. We're doing fine. We have our ups and downs. I allow myself to criticize myself and my co-founder. I would never allow anyone to criticize my co-founder. There's another thing, is that this is not about you. So even though you bring your personal stuff into the, right, but it's about the company. It's never about you. So if you ever need to step down, if you ever need to take another role, if you ever need to make any changes because that is best for your company, then you do that, because that's what matters, really. And well, we co-founded a wellness company, so lucky me, I got to realize that like building yourself up like physically and mentally is going to help you so much. So I made a joke about having to go to the gym and eating better, sleeping better, and not smoking the occasional cigarette or 2 or 3. That took me a long way, and like really, really helped me. So physical health is like a big thing if you're starting a company. And a big thank you to Sloan is, so when I got into school, everyone was telling me like, oh, if you want to find a job, coffee chats right and left, and tell me about yourself in 15 minutes. Waste of time. The one thing I did to build myself like mentally and emotionally was that I built 4 very solid relationships out of this school. People who are there for me, people who challenge me intellectually. We push each other, like we just keep pushing each other forward. We care about each other. They're like my family. Funny story, I'm Egyptian, and one of the people who are just like rooting for me from day one is an Israeli. Calls me every other day to make sure I haven't lost my mind. So that's one thing, like don't leave this school without building a handful of solid like relationships. That's made a whole lot of difference for me.
Fantastic. You too?
Yeah. So one thing that wasn't necessarily between our founding team, but it was with one of our first employees. Like, so we were 4, we were starting to become 5, and we really wanted to figure out like who should that first hire be, and we actually found someone who didn't live in Boston, and so they were close, but like a couple hours away, so they could actually only come and be with the company like 1 day a week, like present. And so we were like, oh, does this make sense? Like, should we do this? And, you know, we decided to like go with it, try to make it work, and like, you know, just power through. And we just figured building software, a lot of that you can do remote, right? Like, you know, a lot of people work in different areas and spaces. But that actually ended up being like a mistake and like just a huge challenge for us. Like, because things were changing so quickly on a daily basis, the idea is changing, like focus is changing, and you're just maneuvering through all these decisions. The person who was like remote and out of the office like 5 days a week, like 4 days a week, was like, what's going on? And just started to feel more and more distant, and then started questioning the decision making. And then, you know, there was more and more meetings about, okay, we need to have this meeting to talk about what we're doing. And it's like, do we really need that meeting? And so there was just more and more tension that started to grow there, and, you know, like eventually it just became unsustainable, and like, you know, they are no longer with the company. And so that was one of those things that like, again, it felt like the right decision at the moment, but looking back, I don't know if it was the wisest one. And I did hear from one of our advisors one time. He was like, startups are like cults. Everyone's got to be there. Everyone's got to be like thinking the same things, doing the same things, be in the same room. Like, you're just always together and like building that company and that vision and keeping people on track. And so that was one of our big challenges, just going through that, and then having to figure out like, how do you let someone go? Because that's the other side of the coin. And like, you know, like, deciding to part ways early on is difficult, but it's also very hard to have like 20% of your workforce like not up to par, right? Like that, you know, with startups, like the impact of an employee who's just like not motivated or like not being able to really focus and like drive the company forward is like huge. I mean, if you can imagine like 20% of a company or 10% of a company just like not functioning well, that starts to add up.
It's like a federal government.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and no one wants to be that. So yeah, so that was definitely like a challenging situation, and we just, you know, we learned a lot through that.
So I guess I'm lucky from a founder perspective because I faced a big challenge on the first one, and then since then I've been very, very careful about picking co-founders, and also very mature in terms of compromising a lot of things for the greater good of the system. If you think about co-founding team as systems, and you think about things are going to happen, we let down one time one exit, one decent exit, because we had to move to Zurich, and my co-founder just realized his wife was pregnant with a third baby, and they couldn't leave at that time for different reasons. So I think in general, what I would say about founding team, and what Jackie also said, the marriage thing is definitely a really important. And I would say really, I can't overemphasize how much you need to be aligned with your co-founder. One of the things I would advise anyone to do is there's a French philosopher called Proust, Marcel Proust, who has popularized a questionnaire called the Proust questionnaire. And it's about 35 questions. Go through them with co-founders, with investors, with anyone. I'm just starting to do it recently, and it's really, really interesting. Even with your partner or dinner, just try this. It's actually very cool. But I want to show you a couple of war stories, because I think that's the other part of the question is, so there's a few interesting things that happened to us that just might be insightful to you. One on IP. The first one on IP, we were in talks for exit with a company that is known for operating systems. And initially, and that company was looking to us acquire us, and they're based somewhere on the West Coast. And as we were talking to them, suddenly we look at our servers and we realized that someone had hacked our servers, and our traffic has gone off the roof from a server side, but not from an analytics side. And we looked down more and more, and we realized the IP was coming from that company. Eventually, we discovered that. We talked to a lawyer. The lawyer said, you have an FBI case, you can win that case, but if you win, forget it, you won't be able to actually get anything in return because you have to put a dollar amount value to that. And once you get to court and you get them there, they're going to countersue you. So we were so upset at that time, we let it go, and it was the right reason to it was the right advice from that lawyer to say, just don't stress about that, focus on different things. What happened afterwards was also interesting. Another company, also on the West Coast, known for search, was also talking for us for exit. And then at that time, what they did is something stupid. One of the team members on their team had, when they built something to compete with us, they had one of their team members decided that if you Google our trade name, Yemli, you would get on the first search result their product. And because they're a search company and they're using their own search results to bump up that and put it under an ad, it was not illegal, but was unethical. And actually, in some of the European countries, it's illegal using it for using your own monopoly to push your own product. So I took a screenshot of that anonymously, and I sent it to the Washington Post. And I put XX, do no evil. This company uses techniques to edge out the competition. And it's actually their motto. And so the next day, surely enough, Washington Post uses the same exact subject line I had. And then it spread, and then 2 hours after that, they issued an apology, and they said, we're sorry, we were going to remove out the ad. Now, they still have the product, and they still went with it, but basically that gave us a completely huge fan base that were like, David and Goliath thing. The last war story I'll share, we were talking, again, all exit stories. Talking with a company for an exit, that was an international player. One of the biggest search players in the world that's not that other company, but international. So they were talking to us, and they're overseas, and they were looking at entering the Middle East. So they don't do Arabic language at the time, and we'd gone with them for 6 months of due diligence and negotiations. And they flew to Boston. We had signed and everything. They were just going to be about one wiring. They told us, we're going to put an escrow account in Hong Kong. You're going to wire money through there, etc. So you're like, I'm going to sleep poor. I'm going to wake up rich. Yay. And we had the dinner, and we even had a video of this with champagne and etc. And we went to bed, and we woke up. I remember I woke up at 3 or 4 a.m., just very excited. And I have an email from them saying, don't worry, the deal is going through, but we have some issue that we're figuring it out internally. And then 2 weeks after that, they pulled out. And the learning here is actually we did all the negotiation ourselves. We had some advisors, but we didn't go all in on finding the best lawyer that does that. And in these cases, you want always a lawyer to be with you, because the lawyer will push and will get things much earlier and will cut shortcuts. And you want someone else to be the asshole on these negotiations, not yourself. Because you can always point, well, it's not me, the lawyer did that, I'm sorry. So that last learning is always have a good lawyer on your side.
Okay, well, listen, time is tight, but what I do want, because everybody has got a wide range of experience, what have we not talked about that you wish you knew back when you were getting your ventures or any of your ventures started in the first place? In other words, back when you were in the position of everybody in the room.
Haven't talked about it yet.
Yeah, it's not easy.
The world is not going to end. Right? When you're a startup, everything is about a startup, and when things go shit, like everything seems like it's going to shut down. And I think what I didn't know, what Jackie said, I'm just going to reemphasize that, was just taking care of your health. It's super important.
Yeah, I was going to basically say that I think people call it work-life balance, but when you're in a startup, there's no differentiation. So one of the things that you have to learn is how to rest in the march, so to speak. So you never stop marching, but you have to find a way to still do the rejuvenation you need so that you're not just spinning your wheels, right? So you can work 12 hours a day for a year, but I'd probably say by month 3 or 4, 4 of those to 8 of those hours are completely useless. So, don't fool yourself into thinking you're getting things done when you're not getting things done. You're just sitting in front of a computer or doing something else, and just because you think you're supposed to be there. Like, go take a walk, go have something to eat, go exercise, take a nap, right? Like, don't do it because that's what everybody else in the startup world is doing. Like, work smarter, not harder. Yeah.
I think one of the things I learned was just it's like the challenge, and it is such a long process. And sometimes you can look at the media, you can look at TechCrunch and see all the success stories that are coming there, but it's just a snapshot of all the work that goes into that. Like, for instance, we took fundraising as oh, okay, we'll be a part of this accelerator. We did Techstars in Detroit, and then we'll come out, we'll have a demo day, and then everyone will be writing checks, right? And every time they describe the program, it's oh yeah, people's gonna be they're out here writing checks, everyone's writing checks, just stand there and collect them. But actually just seeing that process of raising venture capital and being able to, take our business and then package it and present it and get people in mind with vision, and then go through the negotiation. There's just so many things that were part of that process that I didn't realize, and we didn't give enough time for. There's all this lead time that goes into fundraising too. It's again, meeting people, letting them track your company and see growth over time. It's not just a one conversation, I'm going to invest in your company. It's okay, here's what you told me. I met you week 1, here's what I saw a month in, and then maybe 2 months later, okay, I see the trajectory that this company has. They invest in trends, not just points. And so that was one of the big, it was just a huge shock for me. And because we had locked all these great pilots and things like that. And so we were okay, we'll just work, stay close, show it to people, and then fundraising will be over. And so, yeah, so that was that first round of funding took a little while to raise. I mean, expected it to be a month, ended up taking closer to 9 before the money hit the bank. And so just, working with expectations within the team and figuring out survival and everything through that was yeah, that was fun.
Jackie, concluding point?
I mentioned my points earlier, but there's one more thing. So when I said I came to MIT and I thought I would take a job, that meant that I never looked at the entrepreneurship/startup resources MIT has to offer. The great thing is that even after you graduate, you have access to a lot of those resources. Professors would let you listen in on lectures. Joost is going to listen to you ramble for 3 hours about why don't you want to do this thing?
I did it at the end.
He did it. I drew his blood. There's VMS. You just need to physically come here and ask for help, and suddenly you have all these resources, and that really helped me a lot. So.
Yeah, be greedy. That's what we always tell people at Beta Spring. The most successful entrepreneurs are the greedy ones.
Greedy or aggressive?
Greedy. And I say that in tongue-in-cheek a little bit. But basically, when you do an accelerator, you have venture, or, these people, they believe in you. They put money in your company. They're spending time with you. And when they say, if you run into a problem, come talk to us, and you don't do that, then you're missing out on something. So our most successful portfolio companies, 90% of them are the ones that keep in the closest contact with us, and when they run into a problem, I mean, they don't just come to us, right? They come to other mentors in their network, but they're greedy with people's time. And the ones that aren't greedy with other people's time, because they're oh, well, that person's really busy, they're not gonna, I don't wanna bother them. No, they're adults, right? They're really busy, but they're gonna tell you they can't talk to you if they don't feel like they can help you, or if they don't have the time, or they don't want to. So you just have to ask people for help as much as possible. And
all right.
That'll help.
One last thing? Yeah.
Yeah. You reminded me of one thing. When we started the company, we always talked about protecting the company and therefore never talking to anyone about our problems. Today, what we learned is that vulnerability will get you much further ahead than just pretending everything's fine to everyone else. So that's, yeah, my last 2 cents.
All right. Well, we've run out of time for today's session, but I want to ask you to all join me in thanking our panelists, Jackie, Chaz, Owen, Habib. Clearly, there's lots more to be said, and I do hope that you will follow up in your own way to understand what they're doing better. You notice there's props for some of our entrepreneurs here. Everybody, next week, we have the final 3 nights of Nuts and Bolts of New Ventures, including a panel on financing, going through the books, and most of all, next week, Thursday night, we have Yonald Cherry sharing the live case study, the full arc of his latest venture. Okay, everybody, we'll see you next week, Tuesday.
Thank you.